The afternoon sun painted the streets of Brooksville with a soft golden glow. It was the kind of small town where most people knew each other's names, and surprises were rare. Officer Daniel Crane drove slowly down Main Street, the hum of the engine blending with the distant sound of children playing in a nearby park. His patrol car was spotless, his uniform neatly pressed, and his sunglasses hid eyes that had seen far more than the town's quiet streets suggested. Daniel had been a police officer for 15 years. In that time, he had built a reputation. Dependable to some, but in hushed tones, others spoke of his habit of making quick judgments about people. He liked to think of it as instinct, but there were moments when that instinct had led him to treat strangers with more suspicion than they deserved. As he turned a corner, his gaze caught a sleek black sedan rolling steadily along the street. The car looked new, polished, and clearly didn't belong to anyone he knew from town. Behind the wheel was a man he had never seen before, tall, neatly dressed in a dark suit, with a calm, focused expression. Daniel's mind immediately started working. He knew most people in Brooksville, and visitors stood out. Something about the man's confident posture and the way he glanced at the buildings made Daniel uneasy. It wasn't that he had done anything wrong, at least not yet, but Daniel felt a tightening in his chest. Who is he? What's he doing here? The man slowed near the corner of Main and Oak, looking at a small cafe as if checking for someone. Daniel's thoughts sharpened. A voice inside told him to check things out, just to be sure. He flicked on his patrol lights, the red and blue reflecting in the sedan's rearview mirror. The car pulled over smoothly, without hesitation. Daniel stepped out, straightening his belt and walking toward the driver's side. His boots made a steady thump against the pavement. The driver rolled down his window. "Good afternoon, officer," the man said, his tone polite but not timid. Daniel kept his voice firm. "Afternoon. Mind telling me what brings you to Brooksville?" The man gave a small, easy smile. "Just passing through." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Passing through? In a suit? This isn't exactly a business district." The man raised his eyebrows slightly. "I'm meeting someone." "Who?" Daniel pressed. "That's private," the man replied calmly. Daniel didn't like the answer. To him, private meant hiding something. He leaned slightly toward the window, scanning the interior of the car. "License and registration." The man nodded and reached for his wallet. "Sure, I have them right here." His movements were slow and careful, as if making sure the officer could see he had nothing to hide. But Daniel's mind was already building a picture. A stranger in a nice car, in a small town, being vague about his reasons for being here. It didn't sit right with him. "Step out of the vehicle," Daniel said suddenly. The man paused, meeting his gaze. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I asked you to step out," Daniel repeated, his tone leaving no room for debate. With a quiet sigh, the man opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. He was taller than Daniel had expected, his shoulders broad, his presence calm yet commanding. "Hands on the hood," Daniel instructed. A few people passing by slowed their pace, glancing over at the scene. Brooksville wasn't used to this kind of tension in the middle of the afternoon. As Daniel began a quick pat-down, the man spoke again, his voice steady. "You're making a mistake." Daniel ignored the words, focusing instead on checking for anything suspicious. He found nothing, no weapons, no unusual items. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Marcus Hayes." Daniel looked at him for a moment, trying to read something in his expression. "And why exactly are you in Brooksville, Marcus?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Like I said, I'm here to meet someone. That's all." Daniel studied him in silence, feeling an odd mix of certainty and doubt. There was something about Marcus that didn't fit the picture he'd painted in his head, but instead of easing his suspicion, it only made him more determined to find out the truth. The murmurs from the small crowd grew louder. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording. Daniel could feel the eyes on him, but he didn't care. At least not yet. "Let's take a ride to the station," Daniel said finally. "We'll sort this out there." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. No anger, no fear, just a quiet patience that somehow made Daniel uneasy. "All right," Marcus said simply. Daniel guided him toward the patrol car, opening the back door. As Marcus sat down, the afternoon sun glinted off the polished black sedan, now sitting alone by the curb. Daniel glanced back at it, a strange feeling in his gut. He couldn't tell if it was the thrill of catching someone in the act, or the creeping doubt that he might be about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his career. And somewhere in the quiet corners of his mind, that doubt whispered, "What if you're wrong this time?" The police station in Brooksville was small, a 2-story brick building that smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee. Officer Daniel Crane walked through the glass doors with Marcus Hayes just a step behind. The afternoon light followed them inside, but the mood was far from warm. The front desk officer, a young recruit named Miller, looked up in surprise. Afternoon, sir. Who's this?" "Brought him in for questioning," Daniel said briskly. Marcus didn't react. He stood still, calm, his eyes taking in the surroundings as if he were memorizing every detail. The bulletin board with faded community notices, the wall clock ticking steadily, the map of Brooksville pinned behind the desk. "Let's use interview room 2, Daniel instructed, leading the way down the hallway. His boots clicked against the linoleum floor, echoing in the narrow corridor. Marcus followed silently, his footsteps steady and unhurried. Inside the small room, Daniel gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Marcus sat. He rested his hands on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, and waited. His expression was calm. Too calm for Daniel's liking. "Let's start from the beginning," Daniel said, taking a seat across from him. "Why are you in Brooksville?" "I already told you," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm here to meet someone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who? A friend? A business contact? Someone I should be worried about?" Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Should you be worried about me, officer?" The question caught Daniel off guard, but he didn't let it show. "I ask the questions here," he said sharply. Marcus leaned back a little in his chair, his gaze steady. "Then ask the right ones." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Marcus said quietly, "that you're assuming things about me before you know anything about me." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He pushed the feeling aside, convincing himself it was just a tactic. "When a stranger in a suit drives a car like yours into a quiet town like ours, I'm going to ask questions. That's my job." "I understand your job," Marcus replied, his tone still calm. "But there's a difference between asking questions and deciding the answers before you hear them." Daniel looked away for a moment, pretending to jot something down in his notepad. "Where exactly were you headed when I pulled you over?" "To a cafe on Oak Street," Marcus said. "To meet who?" Marcus gave a small, patient sigh. "Someone I can't tell you about." "Not yet." Daniel tapped his pen against the table. "That's not how this works. You're in my station now." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not mocking, but knowing. "And you think that changes who I am?" For a moment, Daniel didn't reply. He studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of nervousness or guilt, but found none. Instead, there was a quiet confidence there, a certainty that unsettled him more than anger ever could. A knock came at the door. It was Officer Miller. "Sir, do you need me to run the plates on the black sedan?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. And check for any prior records on Marcus Hayes here." Marcus didn't flinch at the mention of a record check. He simply folded his hands again and waited. When the door closed, Daniel leaned forward, If there's something I should know, now's your chance to tell me before... Before what? Marcus interrupted gently. Daniel's voice sharpened. Before this gets more serious. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying him. Officer Crane, do you treat everyone you pull over like this, or just people who don't look like they belong? Daniel's grip on the pen tightened. What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means, Marcus replied. His tone wasn't angry, but the words carried weight. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest, but before he could respond, the door opened again. Officer Miller stepped inside, holding a small clipboard. The car's clean, sir. No stolen. Reports. Registered to Marcus Hayes, Washington, D.C. And... Miller hesitated. No criminal record. At all. Daniel blinked. Nothing? Nothing, Miller confirmed. Perfect record. Marcus's eyes stayed on Daniel. Anything else you'd like to know? Daniel dismissed Miller with a nod, but the younger officer's curious glance lingered before he left. All right, Daniel said finally, sitting back in his chair. So you've got a clean record. That doesn't mean you're not up to something. Marcus's voice stayed even. And it doesn't mean I am. You see, that's the problem with assumptions, officer. They work both ways. Daniel stared at him. Part of him wanted to end the conversation, to send Marcus on his way just to be rid of the unsettling calm. But another part, the part he didn't want to admit existed, was curious. Who was this man who could sit across from him under scrutiny and not crack? Outside the interview room, footsteps passed by. Muffled voices spoke in low tones, and the station's phone rang somewhere in the distance. Inside, the silence between them grew heavier. Finally, Daniel spoke. You say you can't tell me who you're meeting. Why? Marcus leaned forward now, his tone low but steady. Because, Officer Crane, some meetings are not meant to be public, and some people need to be trusted before they're told the truth. The words hung in the air. Daniel didn't reply. He wasn't ready to admit it, but something told him that Marcus Hayes wasn't the kind of man who stumbled into trouble by accident. And deep down, he had a feeling that whatever Marcus was in town for, it was bigger than Brooksville, bigger than him, and maybe even bigger than the badge he wore. The air inside the interview room felt heavier now. Daniel sat still, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on Marcus. The calmness of the man across from him was starting to wear on his nerves. Every answer Marcus gave was like water slipping through Daniel's fingers. Never enough to hold on to, never enough to feel like he was in control. Daniel leaned forward. I'm giving you one last chance to tell me exactly who you're meeting. Marcus's expression didn't change. And I've already told you, I can't. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound sharper than he intended. Then we're done here. He stood abruptly and reached for the handcuffs hanging from his belt. Marcus's eyes followed the movement. You're arresting me? On what charge? Daniel didn't answer right away. In his mind, the decision felt less about legal ground and more about authority. He wasn't going to let a stranger stroll into his town, refuse to answer questions, and walk away without consequence. You'll find out soon enough, Daniel said. Marcus didn't resist when Daniel stepped behind him and pulled his arms back. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. You're making a mistake, Marcus said quietly. His tone wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement, like someone pointing out that the sky was turning gray before a storm. Daniel ignored him and opened the door, guiding him down the hallway. The sound of their footsteps echoed against the walls. When they stepped outside, the afternoon sun was still shining brightly, but the street felt different now. The crowd from earlier had grown. Shop owners, pedestrians, and a few curious teenagers stood on the sidewalks. Some whispered to each other, others openly pulled out their phones to record. A woman standing by the bakery muttered, "What's going on?" "Don't know," another replied, holding her phone high to get a clear shot. Daniel kept his focus ahead, trying to ignore the feeling of every eye on him. The sound of shutters clicking and faint video notifications made the air feel electric. Marcus walked with a steady pace, not dragging his feet, not resisting. His head was held high, as if the handcuffs were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Get in," Daniel said, as they reached the patrol car. He opened the back door and guided Marcus inside. As Marcus sat down, he glanced at the crowd. For a brief moment, his gaze lingered on a young boy standing with his father, wide-eyed, clutching a small toy car in his hand. Marcus gave him the faintest nod, and the boy's eyes widened even more. Daniel slammed the door shut and walked around to the driver's side. The murmurs from the crowd followed him into the car, seeping into his mind. "They don't know what I know," he told himself. "They'll understand later." He started the engine, and the patrol car pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Marcus's reflection was calm, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. After a few blocks, Daniel spoke without looking back. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth? You could have avoided all this." Marcus's voice was even almost quiet. "Some truths aren't meant to be handed over to anyone who demands them. They have to be earned." Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's not how this works. You can't just walk into a town, refuse to answer questions, and expect no consequences. And you can't just decide someone's guilty because they don't fit your picture," Marcus replied. The words stung, though Daniel wouldn't admit it. When they arrived back at the station, Daniel parked and got out. He opened the back door and helped Marcus out of the car, guiding him toward the entrance. The crowd that had gathered outside earlier had moved on, but Daniel knew the videos were already circulating online. Inside, he led Marcus to a holding cell. The small metal door creaked as he unlocked it. "Step inside." Marcus stepped in, without hesitation. "You're digging a hole for yourself, Officer Crane," he said, his voice still calm. "One you might not be able to climb out of." Daniel locked the cell. "I'll take my chances." He turned to walk away, but Marcus's next words stopped him. "It's not your job to prove you're right, officer. It's your job to find the truth. And right now, you're walking away from it." Daniel paused for a fraction of a second. Before continuing down the hall, he told himself he wasn't shaken, but deep inside, something about Marcus's words felt too close to the truth. In the lobby, Officer Miller approached him. "Sir, you might want to see this." He held out his phone, showing a video of Daniel arresting Marcus in front of the bakery. The comments were already piling up, some questioning the arrest, others defending it. Daniel waved the phone away. People always talk. They don't know the full story. But even as he said it, the small voice in his mind whispered again. "And do you?" Back in the holding cell, Marcus sat on the bench, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the small barred window, the slice of blue sky beyond it. He knew the situation was about to change, and when it did, it wouldn't be Daniel Crane who held the upper hand. The evening sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the Brooksville police station. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan filled the office as Officer Daniel Crane sat at his desk, staring at the open file in front of him. He had already run Marcus Hayes' name twice, but the results were the same each time. Clean record, no outstanding warrants, no legal trouble anywhere in the country. It didn't make sense. Daniel's gut told him Marcus was hiding something big, yet the SFI system said otherwise. The door to the office opened and Officer Miller stepped inside, holding a small brown envelope. "This came in from state headquarters," Miller said, placing it on Daniel's desk. "They ran a deeper background check like you requested." Daniel tore it open quickly, scanning the printed page inside. At first, it looked like the same. Information he'd already seen. Date of birth, address, no criminal record. But then his eyes caught a line near the bottom that made his heart skip a beat. Occupation: Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent, Organized Crime Division. Daniels. Hand froze on the paper. He read the line again, slower this time, as if his brain needed to make sure he hadn't imagined it. Special Agent. FBI. The words seemed to echo in the small room. Miller, watching his reaction, tilted his head. Something wrong, sir? Daniel folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope, his mind spinning. No, he said after a pause. I'll handle it. Miller didn't press further and left the room, closing the door behind him. Daniel sat there for a long moment, staring at the closed envelope in his hands. The quiet hum of the fan suddenly felt louder, and his heartbeat quickened. He's FBI all this time. Images from the day flashed through Daniel's mind. The confident way Marcus had spoken, the calmness in his eyes, the way he hadn't flinched when Daniel put him in handcuffs. It all made sense now. Marcus wasn't just a stranger passing through. He was here on a mission, and Daniel had just blown it. He stood quickly, tucking the envelope under his arm, and walked down the hall toward the holding cells. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached Marcus's cell, the man was sitting on the bench, leaning slightly forward with his elbows on his knees. The moment Marcus saw him, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. I take it you've read my file, he said calmly. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Marcus leaned back against the wall. Special Agent Marcus Hayes, FBI. I've been working on an undercover operation for the past 6 months, tracking a smuggling ring that moves through small towns like this one. Daniel swallowed hard. And I interrupted that. Marcus's voice was steady, but there was no hiding the edge in it. You didn't just interrupt it, Officer Crane. You might have exposed me. Every hour I spend here increases the risk that the people I'm after will figure out who I am. Daniel looked away, the weight of his mistake pressing on his chest. Why didn't you just tell me from the start? Because undercover work doesn't come with exceptions, Marcus replied. The moment I tell the wrong person, the whole operation falls apart. I can't take that risk, not even for a uniform. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. If I'd known, Marcus cut him off. But you didn't, and maybe that's the point. You were so sure of your instincts that you didn't stop to ask if you might be wrong. The words hit like a cold wind. Daniel wanted to argue, to defend himself, but deep down he knew Marcus was right. I need to be released, Marcus said firmly. Now. Daniel hesitated, the stubborn part of him not ready to give up control. But this wasn't about control anymore. It was about fixing the mess he'd made. He pulled out his keys and unlocked the cell door. Marcus stepped out, straightening, his suit jacket. Even after hours in custody, he carried himself with the same calm confidence. Your chief will want to know about this, Marcus said, glancing toward the hallway. As if on cue, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the air. The police chief, a broad-shouldered man named Roberts, appeared at the end of the hall. His eyes immediately found Marcus, then turned sharply to Daniel. Crane, Roberts said, his voice low and controlled. My office, now. The next 10 minutes were a blur of explanations, apologies, and stern reminders about protocol. Roberts shook Marcus's hand firmly, his tone respectful. Agent Hayes, on behalf of the department, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Marcus nodded. I understand, Chief. I just hope this hasn't damaged my ability to work here quietly. Roberts assured him they would cooperate fully. Daniel, standing off to the side, said nothing. When the meeting ended, Marcus walked toward the exit, but before leaving, he turned to Daniel. We'll talk later, he said simply. The words weren't a threat, but they weren't exactly an invitation either. Daniel watched him step out into the fading daylight, the door closing behind him. For the first time in years, the badge on his chest felt heavier than it ever had, and in the quiet of the station, he couldn't shake the thought that Marcus Hayes had just seen more of him, his flaws, his pride, his mistakes, than anyone else ever had. Morning sunlight spilled over Brooksville, but for Officer Daniel Crane, the day felt heavy before it even began. His phone had been buzzing since dawn, texts from colleagues, missed calls from friends, and a flood of notifications he didn't want to open. The video. He hadn't watched it yet, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly what it showed. Him pulling Marcus Hayes from the sleek black sedan, cuffing him on the hood, ignoring his calm warnings. Every glance, every gesture, every word, captured and now replayed for the world to judge. When he arrived at the station, the atmosphere was different. Conversations paused when he entered. A few fellow officers gave him stiff nods. Others avoided his eyes altogether. Officer Miller handed him a printed email without a word. Daniel scanned it quickly. Media inquiries, citizen complaints, requests for comment. His name was everywhere. The police chief, Roberts, called him into his office. The blinds were drawn, and the coffee on Roberts's desk sat untouched. "Sit down, Crane," Roberts said, his voice low but carrying weight. Daniel obeyed, his posture tense. Roberts leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Daniel. "You've put this department in a bad position. That man you arrested, Agent Hayes, is not just some visitor. He's an FBI operative running a sensitive undercover mission. And you handcuffed him in front of half the town with cameras rolling." "I was doing my job," Daniel replied, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "No," Roberts said firmly. "You were following your assumptions, and now the public sees it differently. The FBI sees it differently." The words landed, like heavy blows. "You're on administrative leave until further notice," Roberts continued. "Effective immediately. Badge and weapon. Now." Daniel hesitated, then unpinned his badge and placed it on the desk, followed by his service pistol. The polished metal seemed dull under the office light. "You're lucky Hayes isn't pressing charges," Roberts added. "He could have your career ended in a heartbeat. Instead, well, let's just say he's willing to have a conversation with you before making any decisions." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "That's something you should ask him yourself," Roberts said. "But for now, go home. Stay out of the spotlight." The rest of the day dragged. Daniel drove home through streets that suddenly felt smaller, tighter. Every time he stopped at a light, he caught someone glancing at him, then quickly looking away, or worse, keeping their gaze locked on him, unblinking. At home, he finally opened his laptop. The video had spread beyond Brooksville. News, sites, social media, even a few national headlines. The comments were split. Some defended his actions, others condemned them sharply. But no matter which side they were on, everyone was talking about him. The part of the video that hit him hardest was the stillness on Marcus Hayes' face. No anger, no shouting, just quiet disappointment, a look that somehow carried more weight than any words could. Daniel shut the laptop, the silence of his living room pressing in around him. Later that evening, he heard a knock at his door. Opening it, he found Marcus standing there, wearing the same calm expression as before. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a dark jacket and jeans. But he still carried that quiet presence that seemed to fill the space around him. "Mind if I come in?" Marcus asked. Daniel stepped aside without a word. They sat at the small kitchen table. Marcus rested his hands lightly on the wood, looking around the modest room before meeting Daniel's eyes. "You're lucky," Marcus said plainly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't feel like it?" "You are," Marcus continued. "If I wanted, this could have been the end of your career, but I'm not interested in destroying people. I'm interested in making them see what they've been blind to." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And what exactly have I been blind to?" Marcus didn't raise his voice. "That not everyone you stop is a threat. That your instincts are shaped by what you expect to see, not always by the truth in front of you." Daniel looked down at the table. "I thought I was protecting this town." "You were protecting the version of it you think exists," Marcus replied. the one where strangers who don't fit in are automatically trouble. But here's the thing. Sometimes the people who look out of place are the ones here to help. The words sank into the quiet between them. I don't hate you, Officer Crane, Marcus said finally. I think you've got potential to be better than this. But potential means nothing unless you change how you see people. Daniel met his eyes. For the first time, there was no wall of pride between them. And if I want to change, Marcus gave a faint nod. Then start by listening. Not to defend yourself, but to understand. They sat in silence for another moment before Marcus stood. I'll be in town a while longer. You know how to reach me. As the door closed behind him, Daniel stayed at the table staring at the grain of the wood. His badge was gone, his reputation damaged, but for the first time since the arrest, he felt something else in his chest. Not pride, not anger, but the beginning of something unfamiliar. It might have been humility. 3 days had passed since Marcus Hayes had come to Daniel's house. In that time, the town had slowly moved on to other gossip, but the video was still out there, floating on the internet like a shadow Daniel couldn't shake off. Without his badge, his days felt strangely empty. No early morning calls, no patrol routes, no radio chatter. Just long hours at home, alone with his thoughts, and the memory of Marcus's calm voice telling him to listen, not defend. It was late afternoon when Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." He hesitated, then answered. "Hello? It's Marcus," came the voice on the other end. "We need to talk. Can you meet me?" Daniel's pulse quickened. "Where?" "The cafe on Oak Street. 10 minutes. Daniel didn't waste time. He grabbed his jacket and drove into town, parking a block away. The sun was starting to sink, casting a warm glow over the small shops. Inside the cafe, Marcus was seated at a corner table, sipping a coffee. Daniel joined him, unsure where to begin. "What's going on?" Marcus set his cup down. "I'm giving you an opportunity, maybe more than you deserve right now, to see something important." "What is it?" "I can't explain it here," Marcus said. "But I need someone I can trust to keep their eyes open and their mouth shut." Daniel frowned. "You trust me now?" Marcus's lips curved slightly. "Let's just say I'm curious to see if you can learn." They left the cafe and walked to Marcus's car, a different vehicle than the sleek black sedan. This one a plain silver sedan that blended in anywhere. Daniel got into the passenger seat, and Marcus drove. Out of town, taking a narrow road that wound through fields and trees. After 20 minutes, they pulled into a dirt lot behind an old warehouse. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Faded paint, cracked windows, weeds sprouting through the concrete. "What are we doing here?" Daniel asked. Marcus kept his eyes forward. "This is one of the locations my team has been watching. We think a shipment is coming through tonight." "Part of the smuggling ring I told you about." Daniel felt a prickle of unease. "And you brought me?" Marcus glanced at him. "You wanted to see people for who they really are. This is your chance. But you don't get to play hero. You stay quiet, you follow my lead, and you watch." They moved to a dark corner outside the building, crouching behind a stack of wooden pallets. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Minutes passed, then headlights swept across the lot. A large delivery truck rumbled up, its brakes hissing as it came to a stop. 2 men climbed out, their movements brisk and purposeful. They rolled up the back door of the truck, revealing stacks of unmarked crates. Another car pulled in, a black SUV. A man in a leather jacket stepped out, shaking hands with the 2 from the truck. Marcus leaned close to Daniel, whispering, "That's one of our main targets. Been tracking him for months." Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the scene. The men began unloading crates, talking in low voices. From this distance, Daniel couldn't hear their words, but the tension in the air was clear. Then, without warning, one of the men looked toward their hiding spot. Daniel's pulse spiked. He was sure they'd been seen. But Marcus stayed completely, still, his breathing steady. The man turned back to his work, and the moment passed. After a few minutes, Marcus tapped Daniel's arm. "Time to go." They slipped back to the car, moving quickly but quietly. Once they were on the road again, Daniel finally spoke. "That's what you've been doing here?" "That's part of it," Marcus said. "Tonight my team will move in. But I wanted you to see that not everyone who looks suspicious is a criminal, and not everyone who looks respectable is innocent." Daniel stared out the window, the memory of the scene still sharp in his mind. "I think I get it." Marcus shook his head. "No, you're starting to. There's a difference." They drove back toward Brooksville in silence, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. When they reached Daniel's house, Marcus parked but didn't turn off the engine. "I'll be leaving town in a few days," Marcus said. "When I do, you'll still be here. The question is, who will you be when I'm gone?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Marcus, seeing him not as the man in the suit from that afternoon on Main Street, but as someone who had given him a second chance, one he hadn't expected. "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. Marcus nodded once. "Then figure it out, and don't wait until it's too late." With that, Marcus pulled away, the car disappearing down the quiet street. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, the cool evening air brushing against his face. For the first time in years, he felt like his next move mattered more than any order, any badge, or any rule he had followed before. The night after Marcus left town, Brooksville felt different to Daniel. The streets were quiet, the small shops were closing one by one, and a soft drizzle hung in the air. He walked slowly down Main Street, his hands in his jacket pockets, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past weeks. For years, Daniel had thought he understood right and wrong. He believed a badge made him the one who decided which was which. But now, after losing it, after seeing Marcus's work and hearing his words, Daniel realized how little he had truly understood. He stopped in front of the cafe where he and Marcus had met. Through the window, he saw a couple of young men laughing over coffee. Their easy smiles reminded him of the faces he used to overlook, people he'd judged without a thought. The next morning, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee staring at the phone. He had been avoiding one call in particular, to the police department. Not to get his job back, but to speak honestly. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Brooksville Police Department, Officer Jennings speaking." "Jennings, it's Daniel Ross." A pause. "Ross, I heard you." "Well, I heard a lot. What do you need?" "I'm not calling to argue," Daniel said quietly. "I just want to say I was wrong about Marcus, about how I treated people. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted someone in that building to know I'm trying to change." There was another pause, then a sigh on the other end. "Well, I guess that's something. Take care, Ross." After the call, Daniel felt lighter. Not redeemed, not yet, but like he had finally taken a step in the right direction. A week later, he heard from Marcus again, though not in person. A plain envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper with no letterhead. Just a short handwritten note, "Keep your eyes open. You'll know what to do when the time comes." Below the note was a folded newspaper clipping from a city paper. It was about the raid at the warehouse, how a major smuggling operation had been dismantled. There was no mention of Marcus Hayes, of course. Just the facts. Daniel read the article twice, then set it down. He knew Marcus was already far away, probably working on something else, but the man's voice still echoed in his mind. The next turning point came a few days later at the community center. Daniel had gone there to drop off some canned goods for the food drive, but ended up staying when he saw a group of teenagers sitting around a table, looking restless. The volunteer in charge was trying to run a small workshop about local history, but the kids were bored. Something in Daniel told him to speak up. He walked over and said, "Mind if I join in?" The volunteer looked surprised but nodded. Daniel pulled out a chair. "You know, when I was your age, I thought I knew this town inside and out. Turns out, I only knew the half of it. You want to know what I learned the hard way?" The teens shrugged, but a few leaned forward. Daniel didn't lecture. He just told them a simple story about how judging people too quickly can blind you to the truth. He didn't name Marcus or the arrest, but the message was clear. You can't know someone's story unless you're willing to listen. By the time he finished, the group was quiet. One of the teens, a boy in a baseball cap, said, "So, you messed up and then you fixed it?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm still fixing it, every day." From that day on, Daniel started spending more time at the community center, not as an officer, not as someone with authority, but as someone who could help, organizing events, joining cleanup days, even coaching a youth basketball team. People in town began to notice. Some were still wary, but others saw the change in him. It wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was something better, a slow rebuilding of trust. One evening, as he was locking up the center after practice, Daniel saw a familiar car parked across the street. It was the silver sedan Marcus had driven that night to the warehouse. The driver's side window rolled down just enough for Marcus to lean out. "Looks like you figured out who you're going to be," he called quietly. Daniel stepped closer, rain beginning to patter on the pavement. "I'm trying," Marcus nodded once. "That's all anyone can do. Keep trying." And then, just like before, he was gone, the car merging into traffic until it disappeared from sight. Daniel stood there for a long moment, rain soaking into his jacket. There was no dramatic ending, no applause, no sudden erasing of mistakes. But he felt ready for whatever came next. The town of Brooksville kept moving. New days, new challenges, and new chances to choose the right thing. And Daniel Ross, once the man who thought a badge made him right, now knew the truth. What made a person worth trusting wasn't a uniform, but the choices they made when no one was watching. He headed home under the streetlights, feeling for the first time in a long while that the road ahead was open.